Hell Let Loose is a very complex game, and for anyone trying to get into a milsim type of game like Hell Let Loose, it is a very overwhelming game with so much going on that it takes a lot to understand, and it gives the game a steep learning curve. And as we get closer to Christmas, there's going to be a lot of Christmas noobs coming on the game here soon, hopefully, to grow the game again. And I thought it would be nice to have a video that actually outlines some of the basics, some understandings, and some general tips outlining this game, and at least give a new player at least some advice and also just some extra knowledge that maybe they didn't have, or a player who maybe wants to get into Hell Let Loose and see what it's about. But this is essentially 10 tips or pieces of advice or knowledge that can help you be a better player if you're a new player in Hell Let Loose. The first major thing I want to go over here is that Hell Let Loose is a lot different than Call of Duty, Battlefield, Halo, or any of those other fast-paced shooters where you can rush around the battlefield, rush around corners, slide, use omnidirectional movement, fly all over the battlefield. Nah, Hell Let Loose is none of that. And it's important to understand this because you can't just rush around the battlefield, going over open fields, and just blitzing through people, because that's just not how it works. The time to kill is way too fast, and the strategy involved in a game like Hell Let Loose that has to incorporate some semblance of strategy, it just doesn't work as well as someone who can just kind of one-man carry a team like in Call of Duty. And honestly, since I've played Hell Let Loose and Rainbow Six Siege so much, my gameplay has slowed down with Call of Duty. But even so, I still can glide around the battlefield in Call of Duty and get a bunch of kills. You just can't do that in a game like Hell Let Loose, where the movement is a lot slower and the time to kill is a lot faster. So you have to keep this in mind, because you're going to die a lot if you go in to Hell Let Loose with a Call of Duty or Battlefield mentality. And it's one thing I want to warn, because it just seems like that is a misunderstanding from people coming over from those games and thinking that they can get away with it. So that's my first overall tip for a new player that hasn't even touched Hell Let Loose yet, or someone who is getting into it for maybe their first couple battles. Now, say you just got the game, you haven't played a single game, and you're looking to at least understand the basics of the game. Well, there is a practice range or practice area you can go to, and I wholeheartedly recommend you spend at least 5 minutes total looking at the field manual, getting a slight look at it. You don't have to go in depth about it. And then go into the actual practice range and maybe play around with some of the weapons, get your settings figured out, because this will help you a lot to understand both the game and actually feel out how it's gonna feel, and to also see kind of how complex this game can be, at least depending for someone who is starting out for the first time. Now, for what you see me just kind of scrolling through here is the field manual, and there is a bunch of information regarding a bunch of different subjects, whether you're just getting started, the game modes, the vehicles, the weapons, the classes, combat. There's a lot for just every little subject, in my opinion. Then there's actually the practice range, which is like a mini sandbox area that you can go around, play with the different weapons for the different factions, play around with the tanks, build stuff. There's even an obstacle course as well. And it gives you the opportunity to actually play around with stuff, get your settings right, and figure out how the game will actually run to your liking, so that you don't just jump in and wonder what the hell is going on with this game, and why is this a weird control setting, or anything like that. Also, you, like I mentioned, you can play around with tanks, which is another complex beast that I'd say get a little bit of experience first playing with the infantry before stepping into a tank. That's just me, though. But regardless, spend about 5 minutes in this area. It would do you a lot of good, and it would put you above at least the average new player, in my opinion. Now that we've at least gotten into the game, we need to understand the game modes that we're actually playing. Now, there are 3 different game modes, although 2 of the 3 are the main ones that are played, with a third one being kind of there, but really isn't played that much. And that being Warfare and Offensive being the main 2 you'll see a lot of in servers, with Skirmish being there every now and then. Now, what are these game modes? So Warfare is essentially a tug-of-war game mode where you have to attack enemy objectives, but you have to defend your own at the same time. And the winner, after an hour and a half, will be determined either by A, holding the middle point, or B, if you take all 5 points from the enemy before the hour and a half timer comes to an end. Now, with a lot of servers, you'll see that this will be the main game mode play, because you have to play both positions. You can't just play offense only or defense only. You have to be wary about both. compared to the other main game mode that you'll see fairly often in Offensive. In the game mode Offensive, you are either assigned to an attacking team or a defending team. The attacking team has to take all 5 objectives before the timers end, and the defending team needs to hold at least 1 objective by the end of the game. Now, for every point, you get 30 minutes to take it, for the offensive team that is. And if you don't take it within the 30 minutes, well, then the game ends. But if the attacking team does end up taking the point, say 5 minutes, just for a reference, then the timer will be reset to 30 minutes, and you get to attack the next objective. Now, you will not know where the next objective is until it spawns in, compared to Warfare, where you know where all of them are at. But this is a game mode where you only have to attack and defend, and on certain maps, this can be easier said than done. The third and final game mode is one you really won't see a lot of activity for, or really any lobbies playing this game mode, except for maybe Hell Loose official ones, and it's Skirmish mode. This is a 30-minute King of the Hill style game mode that, after 30 minutes, whoever owns the middle wins the game. There's less armor crews, less recon, mostly just infantry, and it's there for if you want a quick game, but again, good luck finding a lobby for it. Now we've talked about the game modes and just a little bit of getting started with the game, let's talk about the playable characters or the different classes that you can play as in this game. Now there are a couple different unit designations, so we'll start off with infantry first. Starting off with the officer or squad leader. Now I'm going to try and keep this one short and simple because there's a lot to talk about with the officer, so I'm going to hit just the high points here. The officer is the leader of a squad of infantry in Hell Loose. A squad of infantry in Hell Loose can consist of up to 6 players, hopefully an officer and 5 others. Now, you can have less, depending on the circumstances, if there's just not enough players to fill out your squad, but you can have, at most, 6 players in a squad. And the officer is tasked with communicating with other officers, tanks, recon teams, and the commander themselves to accomplish objectives, whether that be to defend an objective, attack an objective, build garrisons in a certain location, attack a certain way, or defend a certain way, just depending on the circumstance. And they can build spawn points for both their squad and the team in the form of outposts for the squad and garrisons for the rest of the team. We'll get more into these garrisons as we move further into the video, but that's the main role of an officer in Hell Loose. Next up from that, we have the rifleman, and this is essentially the light infantry class. Mostly you just have a rifle, and that's about it. You have some grenades, maybe a hammer to help out with some building, but your main role is just simple light infantry, and this is probably the easiest class to learn or do because all it is essentially you kill people. That's about it. And it can't get any more simple than that. And if you're ever worried about this class being taken, don't worry. The game knows this is a basic class that should be probably taken first, so compared to any other position, there can be up to 6 riflemen in a squad because that's just how the game is made. I don't know exactly why, but it just allows for, if there's no role you want to take because you're learning the game, this is the perfect class to do so. Next up, we have the assault class, and essentially, in the most simple terms I can put this in, this is a stormtrooper type class. You're built to be more fast-paced as you have a semi-automatic rifle or a submachine gun, depending on what faction you play, of course. And you're built to basically clear buildings, clear trenches, and have a lot more semi or fully automatic firepower compared to other classes that we'll get to as we move through this list. As you grind through this class, though, you will unlock more loadouts that will have the Grenadier class, where you have a crap ton of grenades, or the Satchel class, which is perfect for destroying tanks and other player-built structures. Moving on down to the automatic rifleman. This is essentially just a rifleman with a automatic weapon of some sort. Now, for the Americans, you have the BAR. The Germans, you have the STG-44. And for the British, you have the Bren gun. The Russians are the only ones that don't have a automatic rifle, as they use the PPSH drum mag. But essentially, again, you're just a rifleman with a fully automatic weapon. You have a couple grenades, maybe a hammer. But other than that, this is a pretty basic class in its own right and very easy to master, in my opinion. Next up, we have the medic, and I actually had to go into a real game for this one. Essentially, your job is to keep people alive. You can heal people with bandages, even though classes do have them. You can heal them and save them a bandage for maybe if they need it down the stretch, because you do have 20 bandages compared to every other class having 2. And you also have morphine syringes or some way to revive critically wounded players. That way they don't have to go all the way back to a spawn point and basically run all the way back up to the front lines to probably die again. But this class doesn't have a lot of ammo, so do not be using this class to essentially get into a firefight with. Next up here, we have the support player. This is the character that can drop supplies, and once you rank it up, ammo boxes to your team to build garrisons, AT guns, buildings, and just anything your team needs. Next is the Machine Gunner class. This is great for if you want to suppress enemies, as there is a suppression mechanic. You can hose down a bunch of enemies, destroy trucks, and it's just perfect for mostly defensive-oriented combat. You cannot really fire on the move with this thing without aiming in, and even when you aim in, it basically is hip firing it. So find a place to camp out with the bipod and just go to town. Probably a lot of people's favorite class is this one, the AT or anti-tank class. This is the class with rocket launchers, AT guns, and satchel charges, especially as you rank them up, of course, that can be used to destroy enemy tanks and essentially stop an enemy push from going any further if played correctly. Now, depending on the faction, you'll start off with the rocket launcher or the AT gun if you're playing the Russians for the first time. But as you rank up, you can get, as I said, the AT gun, or you can build it with supplies, satchel charges for destroying tanks, fortifications, and just have fun destroying a lot of things with this class. The Engineer class, which is the last class we'll talk about for the infantry, is essentially Bob the Builder. You build things like barbed wire, barricades, nodes, which we'll get to later in the video, of course, so don't sleep on the node part, and essentially just build. You can also repair tanks, and once you level up, you can unlock Satchel class, which is good for destruction. But pretty simple here. Moving away from infantry and into armor, the two classes we'll go to, I'm going to lump in together, the Tank Commander and the Tank Crewman. Now, there really isn't any difference between these classes besides that one can run a submachine gun, being the Tank Commander, and talk directly to commands so they can get tanks. Other than that, there's really no difference between the Tank Commander and the Tank Crewman, as any of the Tank Crewmen or Commanders can run any position, whether they mean driving, spotting, or shooting. Anyone can run any position, and it's all up to the crew's discretion of what they want to do. Moving now down to recon, you get into the spotter and the sniper. So the spotter essentially is just the officer of a recon team, which is just you and a sniper. Essentially, you can relay things like, oh, enemy tank this position, and go behind the lines with a outpost that can stretch way farther than regular outposts, which again is a little detail I'm not going to touch too much on, but we'll get more into as we go along in the video. Now, once you unlock the level 3 spotter for any of the factions, you can unlock the flare class, which essentially will allow you to throw a flare up and a circle will appear on your map, and you'll be able to see just the enemy vehicles, infantry as little red dots or red diamonds. And the sniper is to work in conjunction with the spotter to take down garrisons and do reconnaissance work. There's a lot of ways you play this class, and just going for kills is not the best way or use of your time. But the sniper, as is kind of implied, you have a scope for your weapon, and you typically have a bolt-action rifle as your main battle rifle. So the thing with Hell Let Loose combat is that it's a lot slower paced than other shooter games, where you kind of always run around the corners, you're always probably aimed in, or you're doing something. You're just zipping around the battlefield. This one, the battlefields are so large, it's so hard to zip around the battlefield, even if you tried. Now, yes, you can move around a little fast at times, especially if there's no one around or you're not in a combat zone. You can kind of run around as you need to. But when you know there's enemies around, it's advised that you kind of slow down a little bit and pick your movements a little more carefully. And sure, you can apply this to a couple other shooters, but at least with this one, it really pays to slow down a little bit at times and move from cover to cover as best you can, because the time to kill is very fast. 1 or 2 shots to the chest or to the leg can put you in the critically wounded state, which means you are basically dead. And you gotta go back to spawn and do it again. So just kind of slow down at times and use cover to cover tactics as best you can. Another major aspect that you need to do in Hell Let Loose if you're a new player is communicate. This game is a lot different than other games where you can kind of get away with one-man armying or just not really communicating. This game you have to, especially if you're playing a tank role or an officer role. But you have to be able to communicate and have a mic and talk to people to actually get a strategy, to communicate, oh, there's a spawn point over here that needs to be destroyed, let's take it out. Or, hey, their artillery's pounding us, can someone go back and deal with it? Or there's a lot of different examples you could throw out there. But just to name one, what you see on screen here, I'm on a tank crew with a friend of mine, Major Buzzkill from ZFG, and we're talking about, okay, there's markings here, let's go look at that, but we're going to do this, 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 and this. We have a plan. So it's important to have this because, sure, you could kill 20, 30, 40 people, but if you don't kill like the spawn point, then it's really not going to be worth much because they're just going to spawn back in and take the same positions. So it's important to have communication. Now that we've touched on communication stuff, I'm going to use the same footage here, map knowledge. So understanding what's actually going on and how to read a map in Hell Let Loose, because then you can understand what really needs to be done and maybe take some initiative. So by looking at the map here, and I'm going to pause this here so we can explain this map in more detail. Now to be brief with the map here, I'm currently at Charlie 3. Now, if you look on the x-axis on top here, you'll see the letters above, and on the y-axis or the left-hand side here, you'll see numbers. That way you can track down where certain things are and make callouts if needed by looking at the map and a location. I see that we have some garrisons, kind of hard to see here with the grainy footage, but the little green with the flag on them. And a lot of our outposts are on the bridge with a lot of blue dots showing our officers and infantry. The enemy objective is on that right side across the river, and we need to get to it. There's also some other markings that people have called of outposts, garrisons, and whatever, and we can use that as intelligence to see where things or enemies are at, and proceed with a plan of action. But that's how you can read a map. Again, I'll have other videos on my channel. Feel free to look at these if you want more details. Now, what are these outposts and garrisons I keep going on about? Well, they are spawn points. The outpost, as you see what I'm building now, is a tiny radio set that the officer and spotter can build to spawn their particular squad in on that particular outpost. And the way that works is there is a constant timer of 20 seconds that is always running. And every 20 seconds, that timer resets. That way you might have a spawn time of 10 seconds or 15 or 20 or something like that. And they can be destroyed by the enemy team if they run up and get close enough to them. Meanwhile, the garrison is a table-looking thing that the officer, commander, and spotter can build if they have 50 supplies in the blue zone and 100 supplies in the red zone, which you see is a little table that looks like this. It'll make little radio noises or Morse code or something like that that can spawn an entire team in, or anyone can use it with a constantly running timer of 40 seconds. Now, these can be destroyed by hitting it with a rocket, a tank round. You can go up to it, manually destroy it. But those are garrisons and outposts in a nutshell. Now, this is something that people would be yelling at me if I didn't include. It's about node building. Now, what are nodes in Hell Let Loose? So nodes are things that the engineer can build that provide more resources to the commander. 10 per minute extra if one is built. And there are 3 types of nodes: munitions, manpower, and fuel. The munitions and manpower nodes do offer some other bonuses to the support player, but we're not going to touch on that today. So the things with these is that they provide more resources for the commander, and you get rewarded for experience towards you just playing the game as long as they're up, because they are providing resources for the commander. And you can use this experience to apply to any other class that you're playing as you're getting the points. And it's a big reason why you want to build, because if the commander does not have the resources to fight the battles, like calling heavy tanks, bombing runs, and everything else, your battles can be a pretty short battle if the enemy team has their nodes and your team does not. So just keep an eye out for that. This last little tip or piece of advice is to maintain good situation awareness. And this kind of goes hand in hand with the map knowledge a little bit. And the reason I'm putting it separately is because there's some risky things you can do in this game and get away with if you know what you're doing. So in this particular example, I'm in a tank on a hillside where the enemy tanks, if they were there on the opposite side of the river, they could shoot at me because I'm exposed on a hilltop. But since I know they aren't there because I checked them and saw where our allies were, I figured this was a safe position, and it paid off. I was able to suppress an enemy garrison with friendly tank fire and spot targets for my gunner. So there's that. It's just one of those things that if you see a place where you can put a garrison or be proactive to your officer or whoever you're leading or what you're doing, try to do it. Initiative can win these games more often than you think. If maybe you can sneak around and get a garrison or whatever. Just know where and when to do it. It's just something you'll learn as you go along. Now, in general, obviously, you'll learn a lot more as you play the game, and this is a little long-winded, and I apologize for that, but it just goes to show this game has a steep learning curve, and at least watching this video, even if for 5 minutes or the whole video, will do a lot for a new player trying to learn and understand the game. But I hope you got something out of this video. Take care, good luck on the battlefield, and I'll see you in the next one.